What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Thursday night football between the Bengals and the Steelers. Gonna get you ready for all of your exposure. But first off, a look at the DFS slate and what we're doing for our Draftkings lineups. That includes some game scripting, what we're expecting the field to do, so you can make some of your game theory decisions. We'll talk correlation, some of your top captain options, as well as the Underdog and Prize Picks side afterwards, with a few props that have already entered for the slate. You might want to consider tailing for yourself. And considering we went 2-0 on our slip for Monday Night Football, let's see if we can make it back-to-back full cashes and have ourselves a Thursday night slate. So with a lot to go through, let's not waste any time at all and start off with, first off, a look at the DFS side. Before we go player by player, let's mention the spread and the kind of game environment that we're expected to see. Only a 44.5 point total, so not one of the higher totals that we're going to have here in week 7, and also a 5.5 point spread favoring the Steelers. So from the ownership angle, we're going to see a bias towards the Pittsburgh side, maybe 5 to 10% on average per player. But at the captain position in particular, you're going to see a lot of the Pittsburgh players, whether it's a Rodgers, a Jalen Warren, a DK Metcalf at wide receiver with Calvin Austin already rolled out, are going to be the most popular at that position. So know that heading into it, if you're playing in the large of GPPs, 50 to 100,000 plus entry contest, and you're trying to get some differentiation, anything 3-3 or even a 4-2 Bengals build would be extremely different to what the rest of the field is doing. But I have to say that as a Steelers fan, you guys can see the shirt that I have on here. A lot of you probably know that if you've been a regular on the channel, that I kind of agree with the spread. I kind of agree with the fact that the Steelers should be the favorites here, in particular with Joe Flacco at that quarterback position. It would be a lot different if Joe Burrow was at quarterback, but if you tend to agree with the underdog script, you think Cincy is a live underdog, then anything towards that would be extremely differentiated. But now let's go player by player, give you guys an idea of how to deploy some of these players and what you should be keeping in mind when it comes to your stacking. So first off, I got a Jamar Chase at $12,000, and that's probably the most notable part, is that he is extremely expensive on this kind of slate. We normally don't see $12,000 players. In fact, I don't think we've seen one for all of 2025 yet, and considering that he's got Joe Flacco at quarterback, he's nowhere near worth that kind of price tag. So 1.5x points per dollar value. In fact, a lot of these top tier spend ups aren't going to have the best points per dollar projection. So if you're looking at a cash builder trying to build for just the best median projection, it's going to be a lot more balanced on this slate. You're not going to see a lot of Jamar Chases at captain. You're not even going to get a lot of DK Metcalf or T Higgins. It's going to be a lot of lineups using both quarterbacks, living in this value range where you're not getting that much better points per dollar projection, but you get to spend your salary a little bit flatter across all 6 spots, and you don't have to go down into that value tier range. So it's a little bit of a weird slate. You are going to have some punt plays where you can get to some of these players, even at the captain position, $18,000 for Jamar Chase. We'll talk about those towards the bottom. A lot of that has to do with Calvin Austin III already being rolled out for the Steelers. Some value at that wide receiver position, but you don't have to force yourself to that, especially if you're in a single entry or smaller field cash lineup. We've also got a DK Metcalf at $10,400. He gets a boost to his projection with Calvin Austin rolled out, and to begin with, he's already their number 1 wide receiver. But at $10,400, he doesn't have the best floor for this kind of price tag. In fact, only a 14.7 point median projection. But what you're buying with DK Metcalf is the big play upside. He can take that 5-yard slant and turn it into a 60-yard touchdown. He's already done that a couple times this year. A bunch of red zone upside, multiple touchdown upside a few times per season. That's why he's a great captain play, in my opinion, in large field GPPs, but not the best play in cash, as that floor leaves a lot to be desired. Speaking of low floor, T Higgins at $10,000 is by far the most overpriced player on the slate. He's a 1.1x points per dollar projection. So a guy like a T Higgins you'd only use in large field GPPs. There's zero chance or zero reason to use them in anything that's single entry or cash based. Just far too much risk, far too low of a floor in that kind of a format, and he's got to double his projection to get to the optimal lineup. Whereas Jamar Chase, DK Metcalf, they have anywhere close to a spike performance or even just an above average day, and they could get to that optimal lineup rather easily. A T Higgins has got to go absolutely off compared to what he's expected to do. So a lot of it has to do with him being projected closer to plus 150 to plus 200 to score. He's only got a 4 reception projection on a lot of the sports books, closer to 40 to 50 receiving yards too, is much lower than these other 2 top tier wide receivers. And again, the price tag is just a little bit of a tough scene for T. Then you've got these quarterbacks that project a little bit better than these top tier players, in particular in Aaron Rodgers at a 1.7x points per dollar projection. He's at 1.5 passing touchdowns and juiced rather heavily towards the over. So that's why he's got a better projection than a Joe Flacco that has very similar numbers both on the rushing yard and passing yard perspective. The difference though is that Flacco's at 1.5 passing touchdowns and juiced well towards the under. And that's where you're going to start to see the higher team total for the Steelers really come into play, is with these kind of projection differences from player to player, which is also why the ownership is really favoring that side of things. So I think it's warranted. I think there's a reason why Aaron Rodgers is juiced towards the over on those touchdowns and Joe Flacco is juiced towards the under. But we know that the NFL is rather unpredictable. I mean, we had the Giants beat the Eagles last time around for Thursday, so I was not expecting that to happen by any means. If we get that kind of an underdog scenario, that's how Joe Flacco gets to the optimal over in Aaron Rodgers. But because of this pricing as well being super steep at the top, I think there's a more, say, a higher than normal chance that both quarterbacks end up getting to the optimal lineup, just because they're a lot more reasonable as starting options. They've got the better floor, decent ceilings as well. I mean, if these guys throw for 2 touchdowns, 300 yards, that's about a 20-point performance right there. Not any rushing upside for either side of this game, but 20 points. I mean, you're going to think that at least one of these top-tier wide receivers gets there if one of those two gets to 20 points. That's why even that double quarterback setup probably isn't my favorite build, because if you go to both of these quarterbacks together, maybe it's the best in cash where you're looking for that floor, but in GPPs, you'd have to think that whether it's one of the top 2 Bengals wide receivers, a DK Metcalf, one of those value wide receivers for the Steelers, is going to come alongside with them. So that's why it's in large field GPPs, I'd rather go towards the stack, taking a quarterback plus 1 or 2 of those wide receivers. Single entries, cash, maybe a little bit different with both of those 2 quarterbacks. Next up, we got a Jaylen Warren at $8,400. He's a little bit expensive, but 1.6x points per dollar projection, at least relatively, isn't that bad compared to some of these other top tier players. At Chase Brown at $8,000, he's had a terrible start to 2025. Not going to pop too much at 1.5x points per dollar, but compared to the 1.1x, the 1.4x, even the 1.5x at a $12,000 price tag, you can see why in cash or single entries, like I could see myself using all 4 of these players in that sort of a format, because you can easily fit them in, even use one of those 4 guys at the captain position. And rather than having to punt with a $1,200 wide receiver, a $1,000 wide receiver like a Scotty Miller down here, you're finishing it off with like a Jonnu Smith, maybe a Steelers defense, a Chris Boswell in that sort of a build, which in cash gives you that high floor. And when you're only trying to finish in the top 50%, or in some of the smaller single entries, finish in the top 25 to 30% to cash out your lineup, that is a lot more impactful and the better way to build, in my opinion. But in GPPs, don't forget about this as well. Guys like Warren and Brown also have a lot of correlation with onslaught game scripts. So for example, if you think the Steelers don't just win by a touchdown, but maybe win by 2 or 3 touchdowns, that would give extra usage to guys like a Warren, also Kenneth Gainwell at that running back position. Gainwell, though, a little bit expensive for the kind of role that he's expected to have. But same thing on the other side. If you think Cincy is going to win in an onslaught fashion, I won't be building very many lineups in that sort of a way Thursday. But if you are, Chase Brown captain lineups would make a whole lot of sense there. He'd get extra rushing usage. You could see some other running backs for Cincy, like maybe a P. Ryan, getting some extra snaps and extra carries as well. But these are the sort of things that you need to think about in the large field GPPs. And it's not always like you're building for the optimal lineup. That's why in the large field GPPs, I love the idea of these top 3 wide receivers in particular, a DK Metcalf and a Jamar Chase, because they correlate so much with their quarterbacks having big days, getting to those 20-point performances. But in cash and single entries, I don't love them as much because of that volatility. So you always got to be thinking of the type of player that you're mixing in, the game environment, the kind of game script that you're playing for. In cash and single entries, you don't play for the game scripts as much. GPPs, that should be your pretty much entire focus when you're building those lineups. You've got a Steelers defense here at $5,800. As of now, it doesn't look like they're getting a ton of attention when it comes to ownership, about 24% combined ownership between both spots. So I'll be using them, especially in lineups where Jaylen Warren's my captain. I'm going with a 4-2 or a 5-1 Steelers. I think that they're a way that you can start to get a little bit of differentiation in there. Chris Boswell, not so much. He's getting closer to 30% combined ownership, and in cash and single entries, I could see Boswell being closer to 40% because of the kind of floor that he brings. His 1.5 field goal mark is just heavily towards the over, hence why he's got a 9 raw point projection, and 1.7x points per dollar isn't typically going to stand out too much. But on this slate where we don't have very many good plays, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is also 1.7x points per dollar value. It makes him almost a borderline must play in some of the cash lineups, and even in single entries, I think he should be one of your top considerations because he's only $5,400. He is saving you some salary compared to your average player, and his floor is probably like 6.5, 7 points with true 12 to even 15 point ceiling. So Chris Boswell going to be one of my higher exposed players in this range, but it's looking like the field is going to get behind that as well. And Evan McPherson, you can't roll him out either. He's got a decent projection. He's closer to even money at 1.5 field goals, so that's why he's only at about 7.5 projected points, but still at only 20% projected ownership. There's a little bit of juice to squeeze there if you want to play him in 30 to 35% of your builds and try and get some leverage at that position. And Samaje Perine, if you're expecting the Steelers to play from way ahead, and you guys can tell as a bit of a Homer Steeler fan, I'll be building some lineups that way. Samaje Perine, because of his receiving upside out of the backfield, will get some extra usage. He's also a better blocker than Chase Brown. Brown, though, does also have receiving usage, so it's not like a Derrick Henry situation where if the Ravens are playing from 2 or 3 touchdowns behind, Henry might not even see the field for the last quarter and a half. You're still going to see Chase Brown playing in that kind of scenario, but P-Mine might go from like, I don't know, a 20 to maybe 30% usage rate to closer to 30 to 50% in that kind of scenario. Jonnu Smith is also maybe the best value play that we have on the slate. In fact, he's at a 1.9x points per dollar projection, and though he's only at about 28, maybe 29% combined to ownership as of right now, it would not surprise me if he gets some steam as we get closer to lock, because on a slate where we don't have very many players getting close to 2x points per dollar value, people are going to jam in those sort of options, in particular in cash and single entries. In GPPs, though, he still has upside, as you're going to need some value players, especially if you want to get up to a $12,000 chase. You want to use a premier player like a DK or a Jamar Chase at captain. You're really going to have to save some salary, and I think it's worth doing so with guys like a Jonnu Smith. But Noah Fant, he's healthier now after missing some time with a bit of an injury. He's had more than a week now to be completely recovered, so no questionable tag. He's $3,600. Also 1.8x points per dollar projection, so that's actually pretty decent for this board. A Bengals defense, they're also only $3,200, way cheaper than we normally see defenses, so they're at a 1.9x points per dollar projection. So down low, the values actually aren't that bad, especially because of the wide receiver value that's opening up for the Steelers. So if you need to get to some of these premier wide receivers, you can. It's just that you don't feel great about any of these players in cash or single entries. Like maybe outside of a Jonnu Smith, you'd be okay using. But even a Bengals defense, though they're at 1.9x points per dollar projection, it's the underdog defense and a defense that's been scorched this year. So you're not going to have that much confidence in that kind of a lean. Next up, we got a Pat Freiermuth at $3,000. He's been tight end 2 for the Steelers, which is a bit of a surprise, even for some Steeler fans like myself that thought it would be more like a 1A, 1B situation between him and Jonnu Smith. But Pat Freiermuth, I'd say, is at least somewhat usable in large field GPPs, but at 1.5x points per dollar, you're just not using them in cash or single entries when you have guys closer to 2x points per dollar value around him. And Andre Yoshavash, he's at 1.1x points per dollar. He's pretty much touchdown or bust at this point. He doesn't have as much deep play upside as some of the other wide receivers on the Bengals. I mean, they've got a T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, 2 of the biggest downfield threats that we have in the NFL. Yoshavash is more of that PPR threat. And if one of those top 2 wide receivers were to get hurt, that would thrust him into a much bigger role in the offense. But even playing 30 to 50% of the snaps this year, he has hardly done anything. So, I'll have him in some large field GPP builds. That's what I'm thinking with the Yoshavash. He's a little bit of a sprinkle play there, because unlike some of the backup running backs that we have here towards the bottom that aren't really due to get any usage at all, like for example, Caleb Johnson doesn't really have as much upside. Like the only way he gets there is if he falls into the end zone with a short carry, which is possible. But I would say that guys like Yoshavash have a little bit more upside at the large field GPPs, because he could theoretically pay off this kind of price tag with a touchdown as well, but also maybe with a 40 to 50 yard catch. So not my favorite play, more of a large field GPP sort of option. And even then, he's more of a PPR threat, so I don't love that big play upside as much. Darnell Washington, he's been the flavor of the week for maybe the last couple weeks for the Steelers. He's technically the 3rd tight end on the roster, but he's had some of the best production at that position over the last couple weeks. So I'm having him getting a little bit of steam with the ownership. At $2,000, he's also projecting for 2.2 points per dollar projection. So I think that you're going to see the masses start to play him, which takes away a lot of his value. Earlier this year, I had been on the Washington strain. I pretty much used him every single time that we've had a showdown slate for the Steelers. Hasn't been a whole bunch so far this year, but we get another one here on Thursday Night Football. Unfortunately, though, now you're kind of buying the spike, right? You're buying him after people kind of figuring out who he is, seeing that he's got some receiving upside on top of the blocking upside that he's always had for the Steelers. if he happens to stay around this like 15 to 16% mark, I'll probably have him at 20% of my lineups, which would be maybe slate leverage to the field. But if he starts to steam up to over 20% at that flex position, then I might actually fade him towards the bottom end of the board, because I also know as a Steeler fan that he is far from a reliable option. It's also worth noting that Tanner Hudson is questionable for the Bengals, and he did not technically practice on Tuesday. I don't think they ran a full practice, but the walkthrough that they were doing, he was listed as a non-participant. So I would say that there's a very good chance that he does not play Thursday. We, of course, could be surprised there, but even if he does play, he's probably not as big of a factor as maybe a Drew Sample would be at $600. And speaking of, I kind of hope Hudson's out. I mean, I hope he's healthy and everything, but from, the selfish fantasy standpoint, I hope that he's out so that we can get a $600 sample that's actually going to play some snaps. That's massive for that team. They have Noah Fant in there at $3,600, but Gesicki has pretty much been a non-factor this year. So, a sample at $600 is the one that I'd personally want to flock to the most, and it's looking like no ownership, almost a 4x points per dollar projection there. So that's what we're thinking with the tight end on Cincy. Then we've got these two wide receivers for the Steelers. We got a Roman Wilson, a Scotty Miller, $1,200 and $1,000 respectively. They're going to play snaps. They played snaps last week, for example. A Scotty Miller had almost a 50% snap share. A Roman Wilson was closer to 25 to 30%. I would expect similar numbers for this week, but rather than having all these wide receivers in here, you're not going to see 3 wide receiver sets for the Steelers. It's going to be a lot of 2 or even 3 tight end sets. You're going to get the Pat Freiermuth out there with on top of a Jonnu Smith. You're going to get Darnell Washington playing some snaps. So that's why I'm still going to play Darnell, even if he is like 15% out. I just don't want him to be mega chalk at that 20 to 25% range. But these wide receivers, I'm hoping the ownership stays somewhat reasonable. It's still early in the week. We just got that Calvin Austin news, so I'm not quite sure what the industry sentiment is going to be on these 2 players. If they stay around 10% ownership, I've got them at 7 to 8% right now, then yeah, I'll jam them into my large GPP lineups. But if any of them or both of them get 15 to 25% ownership, give me those tight ends instead. And, the ownership has to come from somewhere. So if these 2 guys are going to steam up and maybe a Washington steams down, then those are the kind of players that I'll mix in. Maybe a Drew Sample's at 0 ownership with a Tanner Hudson out. If we get that kind of news and Sample goes down to sub 5%, he could be the nutted play towards the bottom. Brent Skoranek, he's at $200. He's got nearly a 10x points per dollar projection, but that is, of course, only because he's $200. But even he played snaps last week. He played, I think it was 15 to 20% of snaps for the Steelers. He's a great blocker. So if you believe in the Steelers onslaught script, here's what I'll throw out with Ben Skoranek. Is that he's going to play as a blocker, right? In the second half, he'll play probably almost all of the snaps, or at least like 50 to 75% of the snaps. If the Steelers are playing from a touchdown or 2 ahead, that could be his way to the optimal, because you're still going to pass the ball a bit in the second half. And when you're only $200, 2 catches for 20 yards, that's how you pay off that kind of a price tag. So that's what I'm thinking towards the bottom. There's a lot of usable value plays, a lot of risk involved with those sort of options. They have very narrow ways to the optimal lineup, but if you bink one of those, then you can afford these top tier captain options. So GPPs, that's how I'm building. It's going to be more of that home run threat, more of the studs and duds kind of build in those kind of a contest. Whereas in the cash/single entry, it's going to be a lot more of that balanced and making sure that I'm not having to take those punts at the bottom. And now for the prop side of things, where I've got a few props you guys might want to consider tailing out here for your Thursday night football exposure. And for Monday night football, we had the Bijan Robinson anytime touchdown. Also Josh Allen over 1.5 passing touchdowns. Both of those cashed, and we got a little 2.7x added to the bankroll. So we'll see what we can do here on Thursday and hopefully run that back. And the first prop we're going to mix in is going to be an over on TJ Watt at 0.75 sacks. And while we don't have the 0.75 number to compare to quite yet, when we do so, he's going to be plus EV value. And here's a couple data points on why. First off, on DraftKings, where you don't have the 0.75 number posted, it's just the one-way market for sacks right now. He's minus 156 towards the over. And over the years, a lot of people have given flack to sites like DraftKings because their one-way markets weren't really that fair. Over the last year or so, they've really tightened it up, though. They've made it where you're not getting massive juice just towards that one-way market. So when they post the 0.75 sack number, that's likely what you're going to get for TJ Watt on DraftKings. He'll probably be at least minus 140 juice towards the over. And in fact, based on the track record that we've seen on DraftKings being a little bit more fair in some of these markets, I would expect it to be closer to minus 145 to minus 150 juice. So a minus 145, a minus 150 prop is, of course, well into that plus EV threshold. And against the Cincinnati Bengals, you got Joe Flacco at quarterback, immobile, not going to be moving around very much. An extremely explosive pass rusher like a TJ Watt is just going to have an absolute field day at it. So this is a team that's given up some sacks this year. TJ Watt's been on a roll over the last couple weeks, is really coming into his own after a slow start to 2025. I'll take that all day. And if you go to the FanDuel number, this includes the half sack, so the odds are going to be a little bit different on this side. But TJ Watt's minus 188 to record a sack. And we know, or at least if you follow some of these outside pass rushers, their equity for a half sack is a lot lower than the inside pass rushers. When even a cornerback goes in to try and tackle a quarterback, sometimes they don't take them down right away. It ends up being a shared sack because of one of the other linemen coming in and helping them finish them off. But if you're a central lineman, like a defensive tackle, for example, you oftentimes get half sacks because of that same reason. You're a little bit slower to the pass rusher. You end up sharing it with one of those outside guys that's forcing them up into that pocket. These outside guys, they still get you half sacks if you take a look at TJ Watt's record over the last few years or so, but it's not nearly as prevalent as some of those other players. So I'll take that all day. I think when we get that 0.75 sack line that he's going to have that minus 145, maybe even minus 150 juice towards the over, which means that this will be a goblin prop when that happens, right? Prize Picks will be bumping that at some stage when they react to those odds. So playing it now before that sort of line movement happens is advisable in my opinion. And then on the other side of this, I took this with an over at Joe Flacco at 22.5 pass completions. So there was a 0.5 bump up to 23. But if we go to a site like Draftkings, for example, and we go over to their passing props, you'll see that Flacco's not only at 23.5 completions, but he's also juiced a bit towards the over. So if we scroll down here, I guess he's at even money exactly at 23.5 now. But even then, that's a 0.5 difference. And you'll see why I took him at 22.5. On Pinnacle, he's minus 130 juice towards the over. If we go here to FanDuel and take a look at it as well, he's also minus 130 juice. So that's why he got that 0.5 bump. But I would argue with him at 23.5 on DraftKings and even money that he might still be worth taking at that number. And what was beautiful about that at 22.5 is that this was a full 3x payout, even though there's some clear correlation between these two different spots. Because, you know, if you think about it, if the Steelers are playing from ahead, they're 5.5 point favorites, pretty big favorites from the money line perspective as well, then that means that Joe Flacco is going to have to step back and pass the ball more often, hence giving us a better chance for his over on passing completions, but also more attempts for TJ Watt to go out there and get a sack. Because, of course, to get a sack, we need quarterbacks to be dropping back and passing the ball. And if they're playing from behind and passing the ball further down the field, then that means that there's better opportunities to get a sack when you have to hold on to the ball a little bit longer. So there should, at least in my opinion, be correlation. There should probably be a 2.5 to 2.75x multiplier on this kind of a combination. And it was a full 3x payout. Now, we did have that bump, so I'm going to give you guys a slightly different lean to consider, but you're also going to see why it was nice taking that sort of a lean, because we didn't have to worry about that kind of a juice. On this one, it's 2.75x. So they are giving you that correlation that you should have to worry about. And think about it. This is a reception prop. The other one was pass completions. It's essentially the same thing, except one's for the entire team and then one's for a specific player on Jamar Chase. But it's worth noting, if we go to the odds on Jamar Chase, even at 2.75x, a lot of the sports books, if you take the over on TJ Watt sacks and a Jamar Chase at 6.5 receptions, because Jamar Chase is close to minus 130 juice on these books, as I'm about to show you, you're actually getting a better payout on this 2.75x than you'd get on a lot of the sports books. A lot of the single game parlays and like a Hard Rock Bet, DraftKings, FanDuel, whenever they end up posting all those two-way markets, you're going to be looking at closer to 2.55 to 2.6x in a lot of those different cases. This is 2.75x, so it's really not the worst. And if you go to the receiving yard props, and to show you the kind of line value that you're getting on this, you'll see that he's minus 137 towards his over on DraftKings. That is extremely close. In fact, it's right on the border of being a quote-unquote plus EV value. And then if we go over to the FanDuel side, he's minus 130 towards the over too. So into that plus EV threshold, or at least very close to it. Some correlation between these two with a Steelers-led script. And I'm a bit of a homer. You guys can see the Steelers shirt on my screen, on the screen right there. But they're also 5.5 point favorites. So I don't think it's unreasonable to expect them to be the team that's controlling a lot of the game. And if that happens, that'll give us a little bit of a boost in both cases. And why I think this is value to go ahead and mix in. But for every single slip that I'm taking, you guys can find those on my Patreon page. I'm posting every single piece of exposure as I'm getting to it, whether it's on the sports books for sites like Hard Rock Bet, Prize Picks, Underdog, like we go through on a lot of these videos. To detail all of that, check out the Patreon page in the link in the description of the video. And for all the DFS projections that you were seeing before, for up-to-date projections, also for up-to-date player poll, the entire player poll, every single guy I'm going with for the Thursday night slate, make sure to check out the Patreon page for that. That's on the DFS tier. Prop tier is how you get access to all the prop slips that you were seeing there. And let's have ourselves a night. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our Week 7 main slate preview, dropping on a little bit later on this week. Also our Monday Night Football previews, Thursday Night Football throughout the rest of the season. To catch all of that, don't miss anything when it goes live on my channel. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And also go ahead and comment down below who you've got as the top scorer for Thursday Night Football for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. And on there is where I'm posting all the content as I was saying before. That's the spreadsheets for DFS, also every single prop and bet that I'm taking for Thursday Night Football. For a chance to earn that for free, just give me that top scorer for Thursday, and it'll be on a first come first serve basis. Anyone is live for this, and as long as they have the top raw DraftKings score, you'll win a free month access. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support on the channel as per usual. Hope to see you guys towards the top end of the GPPs. I hope that we can cash out on that prop slip as well, add some to the bankroll, get some extra units in there, and have ourselves a night. But until next time, best of luck, as I was saying, and let's get after it.